Ken Offit, and I am the Chief of the Clinical Genetics Service at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York. I'm also a professor of medicine and public health at the Weill Cornell Medical College in New York. And I've been working in the area of cancer genetics for my whole career. Well, I started out actually when I was at the public health school at Harvard, interested in environmental cancers and prevention, and came into cancer genetics just about the time that we had our first understanding of the genetic causation of common cancers. Came to Sloan Kettering in New York. It's going to be 40 years soon. And during that time, I've progressed from the genetics of lymphoma and leukemias into breast, ovarian, prostate, and the other hereditary forms of cancer that have emerged over the last decades. We started one of the first, now I think one of the largest clinical programs counseling individuals for their hereditary cancer risk, and then trying to make the interventions work for these families that are affected to decrease the burden of these inherited cancers. So I was one of a group that started this work before we had BRCA1 and 2, when we just knew that there were families at risk. Our major contribution in New York was to describe what turned out to be then, and I think still, the commonest mutation in BRCA2 that affected an isolated population, those Eastern European Ashkenazi individuals. And we found that mutation back in 1996, and because of that, we were able to do fairly large-scale studies with fairly simple methods of doing the genetic analysis. That led us to one of the early observations that preventative ovarian surgery could be life-saving in these families, and to a number of other clinical insights that we think have translated to bettering the lives of these affected families. This work's been done in collaboration with colleagues, and very close colleagues, I would point out here, at the University of Pennsylvania. So the work is very meaningful to me. As a medical oncologist, having spent decades of my life treating cancers, starting with lymphomas, where we did pretty well, but not perfect. The transition to prevention happened about a third of the way into my career. And I remember when it happened, and I realized that this is kind of what I hoped to do, which is to direct all of our technology, all of our energy into intervening in families before an event happened. For me, it's a great joy. I will tell you, this community of BRCA scientists is not that large, and we're very close. I will tell you that, for example, with the group here at UPenn and at Dana-Farber and Mayo, we at one point met almost every week on projects, and still meet almost every week on a number of shared projects. We consider ourselves personal friends, professional colleagues, and so it is a special kind of an honor when your friends and your colleagues give you a slap on the back. And I'm very pleased to join the distinguished group that have received this award. Well, there are many critical issues. Today, we're focusing on the basic science of DNA repair and ways to target our interventions with drugs. We need to be much better at the basics of disseminating this information in populations. And particularly, and I'm saying this now after a couple of decades of doing this, disseminating this information in families. There are real barriers that we encounter on a weekly basis in our clinics that prevent the transmission of this information from sister to sister sister to aunt, from the patient to the uncles, the men who are potentially at risk for pancreatic cancers and prostate cancers. And so one of the major goals that we've been focusing on is this implementation science of increasing the ability of families to communicate one with the other. We found during COVID, many of us were able to practice medicine across state lines. This was fantastic. One of the projects, and I'll describe this in our talk, is in a research context to be able to do that again and to use our internet-assisted supports so that family members all over the country can share information with each other. I think the Bassler Center already has impacted the field. I think the mechanistic work in homologous repair, defects, and targeted therapy, the basic science of DNA replication has been an area of Bassler investment from the outset. And you could hear this morning, I think, some of the fruits of that investment, talking about the positive clinical trials, the understanding of resistance to this new class of drugs and PARP inhibitors, and in general, fostering interdisciplinary interactions between, you heard this morning, genetic epidemiologists asking questions of basic scientists, immunologists asking questions of molecular biologists. In science, there's this increasing tendency to form these silos in our subspecialties. And I think the Bassler group, and there are not many that can do this, bring together multidisciplinary scientists in a room to talk with each other and to design better experiments. Well, I think the important message for these families at hereditary risk for cancer is that we have made substantial progress. You know, when we first started this, and it's 30 years, that's the title of my talk, 30 years, 3 decades since these initial discoveries, it was not clear to us at that time that this type of information would be empowering. It wasn't clear that there would be interventions in families that had this genetic destiny. And what we learned over those decades is that one can change one's future. And that is a pretty amazing concept. The philosophy of that and the medical practice of that has been very, very dramatic. And I would encourage families not to be afraid of seeking out information on one's genetic destiny because it can be changed. We have interventions now that are proven to decrease the burden of these cancers in families. And we now, for the first time, have a real promise of targeting drugs that may actually shut down some of these hereditary cascades of risk entirely. So it's an exciting time to be a scientist, and I think an encouraging time to be a member of a cancer-prone family.